Fingal.
Thank you, Gearlock. Gearlock, I wanted to speak in relation to Amendment 21 and the Minister's proposals to bring forward to compulsory force people to register whether they're the occupier or not of a property. It has been outlined by other speakers in relation to the onus and the difficulty that this creates for tenants who are obliged within 20 days of this legislation being enacted to register with Irish Water as to whether they have a tenancy or whether the landlord has to register as well. But it also affects individual householders who haven't registered as well. Because as I understand it in my reading of it, maybe I'm wrong, Minister, but Section 23A1A or 23A1A actually says that they register with Irish Water as a customer and confirm whether or not the dwelling is as a principal private residence. So if you're obliged to register and confirm that it's your principal private residence, that's the same effect. So basically this is targeting everybody who hasn't registered with Irish Water, whether they are landlord or tenant or not. And I think it's a sign, and it shows that your policy has actually failed, that your attempt to actually introduce a second charge and a double paying on citizens for water services across the country is a failure when you see that you have to act in this way and taking in such significant legislation as an amendment to a miscellaneous provisions bill and try and subvent the second stage, potential for second stage discussion and for committee stage discussion as well in relation to the potential impacts of legislation such as this. So it shows the complete failure of government policy. It shows a complete failure of in relation to Irish Water, and it shows for all the citizens out there that have stood in principled opposition to the introduction of a second water charge and imposition on citizens. It shows that they are right to stand together and to oppose this unfair and unjust water tax. And I think that's vitally important that message goes out here today from the House, that the citizens that are standing against Irish Water are actually defeating this government and defeating Irish Water by doing so. And I would call on people to stand together and continue to stand together in the face of this draconian measures that have been introduced by the government in relation to this, and particularly, and I think what really will stick with people and really will gall people across the country is the underhand way it has been dealt with and the way it's been slid in at report stage here as a major amendment on its own, which is something that should be amending legislation in its own right in terms of the Water Services Bill or the Water Services Act, and should be dealt with in that way. So the people know and the citizens know out there what actually the government is doing, and they know that they have the government on the ropes in relation to this, because clearly the whole rollout of Irish Water has been a failure. Clearly people are refusing to pay the water bills, and the boycott of the water charge is extensive right across the country, because if it wasn't, and if there was any sense within Irish Water and within the government that people were actually signing up to the second water tax and paying it, you would be releasing figures on a regular basis in terms of the percentages of people who actually have paid and have complied with their demands in relation to Irish Water. So it shows to people the success of the campaign, and I think that people should take great encouragement from that, and shows that this government is forced into doing things like this in an underhand way to impose a potential Class A fine on citizens who take a principled opposition to your policy in relation to this, to this further austerity tax and further attack on the citizens. And it shows, I think, as well, that this government hasn't got a mandate to continue on with the implementation of Irish Water and with the imposition of the second tax on citizens. So while it does have a huge impact on tenants and potentially on tenants, and could actually, where a householder makes a decision not to register with Irish Water and being the occupier of their own house, they at least cannot be evicted from their house and if they don't comply with this section, and they at least will still have a roof over their heads if they refuse to comply. But for tenants, it leaves them in a very precarious situation, as if government policy hadn't left them in a precarious enough situation with the complete and utter refusal to deal in terms of the rent allowance and rent supplement, and the actual refusal of this government to introduce any measures in terms of rent certainty and certainty for tenancies, and to hide behind the constitutional provisions that to say that they can't do anything about that. it leaves those in a very vulnerable position. And I think all of us will take strength from the position that we're in, because we know that this is a government that's defeated on this issue, and we know that the days are numbered of Irish Water, because the government has to resort to this kind of tactic to actually threaten people and to impose fines on people, potentially impose fines on people if they don't register with Irish Water within the time frame that the government has set out in this legislation. And I think that's vitally important. And I think if the government were trying to go full in their arguments and wanted to convince people and talk to people and convince people of the need to pay this second water tax and wanted to do that, you wouldn't need to be introducing measures like this to hide behind to force people into it. And people were concerned and were frightened by your imposition in relation to the property tax and your forcing that through that legislation. But I think people have decided that they've had enough, and they've stood against the water charges, and they're going to continue on with a boycott campaign against the charges. Because really and truly, the other side of it is, not registering is a form of opposition, but not registering doesn't matter if you're not going to pay, and the boycott campaign will continue, and Irish Water will collapse on the basis of the fact that they can't raise the revenue that they need to keep going.
Thank you, Deputy Postma.